Hello, and thanks for stopping by. I'm Joe Pryor, and this is Spreadsheet Excellence. In this episode, we're going to take a look at a more advanced formula and the building blocks you can use to build more formulas of your own. The specific one will be percent change. We're also going to take a look at data grouping or hiding columns and why you would want to do this. And then lastly, we're going to talk about conditional formatting in this episode. We're going to continue working with the spreadsheet we've been building over the course of the series, and this is just an iterative step along that journey. So let's go ahead and pull up our worksheet. Here you go. So this should look pretty familiar, and we have finally gotten to the point where we're not just collecting information, we're doing analysis on it. And the first thing that stands out to me when I look at this spreadsheet here is that we're collecting the percent of total across the entire year, and that all of this data that's in here is just kind of white noise. If I'm conducting analysis, it's just kind of white noise. And additionally, when I look at the averages of all of the locations, that doesn't really give me a lot of good data, because sure, we can tell that everybody seems to have dropped, but maybe just one location had a really bad drop. And so what we're going to do now that we've collected all the information is we're going to actually upgrade or improve our spreadsheet here. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the percent change from every quarter after the first, because obviously there's no previous data for us to work off of, at least in this particular instance, from quarter one. So there's no percent change. This is the baseline. This is the standard. So we're going to leave Q1, and then we're going to calculate the percentage change between quarter one and quarter two and quarter three and quarter four, et cetera, et cetera. And what that's going to necessitate us doing is adding some space to this spreadsheet, but we're already also taking up quite a bit of space, and that's where data grouping is going to come in. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create some more space for me to work with so I can create those calculations like I wanted to do. And this is pretty straightforward. You've seen this before. We're going to go ahead and just click on Insert. 1, 2, 3. That's the 3 quarters that we have left over. We're going to do one more for an additional average calculation, and that will be our cleanliness measure. We'll do the same thing in customer service, but I'll do it off camera because it's the same exact steps. It's just going to be repeated, and it's going to give us a lot more data, and you'll see what I'm talking about when I get finished. So the first thing we want to do is calculate average cleanliness. You know what? Let's just truncate that a little bit, and that's good. So that stays right there. Let's put that right in the middle there. And so instead of calculating across the quarter, now what we're going to do is we're going to calculate by location. And this is a more useful metric in my mind because we're really worried about the performance of each individual location, not each individual quarter. However, the eagle-eyed among you may notice that we're already starting to break things. You'll notice, let's press Control Z. All these formulas here, they all just got screwed up, didn't they? Why? Because I added a bunch of new data to it. So we need to go ahead and fix some things. So I had summed across the entire aisle, and now we're going to need to change kind of how that works. So we're going to need a sum from here to here, and then we're going to need to add a comma, and create a new block, and from here to here. And then that should preserve our numbers. And then we drag that down, and all of our values fall back to the exact same place that they were. So now we can do really whatever we want within these square cells without breaking any of our previous formulas. But you got to be careful for that kind of thing. If you change any of these numbers, they will cascade down. So if I decide that the customer service scale was out of 45, all of a sudden these numbers all change over here. So what was it, 50, right? Let's leave it at 50. So if we're going to calculate the percent change, first thing we need to do is, this is Q2, and it's percent change. But you'll notice the word change is kind of long and doesn't really work there. And so I like to stick the Greek symbol. So this is under the Insert tab all the way on the left. You find the button for symbols. You can really play with a lot of cool, fun, kind of additional pieces of information. Some of the more useful ones are these numbers, 1 through 20, 1 through 20, although the alignment's a bit weird. You'll also have fractions, 1, 6, 5, 6, etc., etc. You'll have Cyrillic letters if you're using other languages. I think there's also Greek, Arabic, Hebrew script. So if you want to include information from other languages, this is a great way to do it, inserting via symbols. It's also great to insert via separate or other nations' currency symbols, the pound, the euro, the yuan, copyright, et cetera, et cetera. All these sort of superscript things that you might need to have. And as you can see, I've recently looked up the Greek symbol delta. It's also right up here. And this gives you the character code. So if you were to hold down Alt 226 in a square, that should type in the Greek delta. But I come up here and I click on the Greek delta. Now the capital Greek delta, you click on Insert and there it is a statistical notation for the concept of change. And so we're going to drag this across. Now it's not going to automatically self-increment because there's too much going on for Google to figure out what's happening. But that's easy for us to change. And then we just go in and change our one number. So the statistical concept of change, percent delta, is essentially, percent delta is just how much did this value change from that value. And the way that we calculate that in Excel is we subtract the old value from the new value. I press the space bar, which is weird because you do it backwards from how you say it, and then you divide that against the base number. Now we're going to get a wonky number here because I did something wrong. I didn't wrap this particular procedure in parentheses. You can see in the top right where I have the formula bar. Let's see if I can't blow this out so you can see a little better. So I didn't I didn't surround D11 minus C11 in parentheses. And so what it's doing is it's dividing C11 by C11, which gives you obviously a value of 1, and then subtracts that off from 9. So we need to wrap this in parentheses to tell Excel to do this first. And then we get minus 55, which doesn't mean anything relative to our uses. So now we want to click on percent style or come down here to the percentage in the pull down box, and they'll even give you a nice little preview of what you're going to get. And that's correct. 9 would be a percent change, a negative 55% drop, or a 55% drop from its previous value. And we can go ahead and, what was the width of everything here? This is 10.14. All right, let's make you, for now, 10's fine, I guess. Let's do them all because you want this to look as uniform as you can manage. And so now we should be able to just drag this all the way across. Oh, only one way. All right. And there. So what it's doing, and we talked about this in the last episode, relative versus absolute positions, because we've got one block of numbers over here and then one block of numbers that mimics exactly the position of those numbers, we can just drag and drop without worrying about relative or absolute positions. In fact, relative positions are exactly what we want. We're subtracting this from this and then dividing by this. This from this, divided by this. And then when we do quarter 3, we do this from this, divide by this, et cetera, et cetera. So now you've got kind of a complicated, this is a lot of numbers for someone to look at, and it's going to be confusing for someone to try and make any meaningful analysis from this. And so we're going to talk now about conditional formatting. First, we're going to talk about data hiding. So the obvious way to do this, we need to keep Q1 as our baseline, or else our deltas don't mean anything. The first thing you can do is simply hide the cells. And you'll notice this is A, B, C, and then straight to G. And if you kind of see the bar, yeah, so it's a little harder to see. Let's see if I can zoom in some. Yeah. You see there's kind of like two bars almost between. You see how there's like just one gray slash between I and J, and between C and G there's two. And that's telling you there's a lot more going on in there. So you can press that, just double click it, and they'll start to become visible. But there's a cleaner way for us to do this. And what we're going to do, click on Shift, click between Q2 and Q4. And we're going to go up to here to the Data tab. You see Data. And then we're going to go ahead and click on Group. And what this does is it adds this new element to the top of the screen, which does more or less the same thing as hiding the columns. But now it's a very easy to find UI element. This plus lets you zoom out and see the areas of the screen that you have collapsed. All right, cool. So the next thing we want to do with regard to all these percents is take them down one. We only need one decimal place. This just gives you an idea, and then we can run from there. And I actually think I want to put the average on the end. Oh, that's right. Okay, so we can put the average on the end, and then just delete that column altogether, and we have average clean. Now, why am I doing that? Because the average would kind of confuse the story here. Q1 is your baseline. This is your standard for the whole period. There's your cleanliness value. And then from here, in Q2, we have a 50% decrease, but in Q3, we have a 111% increase. And then Q4, we have a 42% decrease again. And over the course of the year, the near north location was only able to manage a 14.75 average cleanliness score. From a start of 20, that's quite the drop. They have had a tumultuous year. By comparison, take a look at locations like The Loop or Harbor Town. These locations have had very static years. Their averages are very close to where they started, so they held steady. This is a much more useful set of data for someone managing a business than all of this. This is just white noise. But this is something you can do. This calls your attention to the data. And the way that we can really even more strongly call that attention is through the tool conditional formatting. This is one of the easiest to apply, but it's also kind of a slippery slope. And if you go too far with conditional formatting, it can create a page that is so colorful it's hard to make sense of. And so there's a couple of really cool ways you can use conditional formatting, but for the purposes of keeping things simple today, and we'll get into more later on, we're just going to use the color scales. Color scales are a great tool. We'll select this one here, green, white, red color scale. And the tooltip will actually tell you more or less what it does, but essentially it applies a color gradient to all of these values that you've selected. And the strongest values, the strongest positive and the strongest negative values, are given color weight that matches the strength of what they've got going on. So the 111.1% increase in Q3 is a strong green color, and the negative 70% drop in Q4 on the west side is a strong red color. And you'll notice here that these cells where like not a lot happens relative to this stuff up here, these cells are kind of a white neutral color, a very light pink or a very light green. And so one of the things you got to watch out for with conditional formatting is it draws your attention to the strongest. It weights your attention towards the strongest performers or the edge of the bell curve. And sometimes what you're looking for is more what's happening in the middle, or how many things are deviating from a norm. So sometimes the color gradient isn't what you want, but in this particular instance, the color grade probably is a perfectly useful tool. A great example of why is this useful, more useful than the other data we had. So we now have information about the performance of each individual location rather than performance in cleanliness per over the entire quarter. And why is that useful? Well, conditions in the Loop might be different than conditions in Harbortown, or conditions at Queens Ridge may be different than those at Westside or Buckley. And so we see these stores with these tumultuous years. Like, this has been a very messy, hard year for these locations, whereas things seem pretty smooth down here. Well, is this a well-off neighborhood? Is this a up-and-coming or quaint neighborhood? Or is this a neighborhood where nothing happens and these locations aren't getting any business? And that's why it's so easy for them to stay clean, is because they're not busy. Maybe Near North is getting hammered. Maybe West Side saw a huge spike in business. This screams for more investigation. And anybody who comes across your data who has no other knowledge, let's take a look at the cleanliness versus the customer service. I think this gives a really great illustration of the value of a little bit of quick conditional formatting and the value of illustrating for your viewer the percent change versus just giving them the absolute numbers. Because this doesn't tell a story. This is just a bunch of numbers, and most folks, their eyes go cross-eyed. This tells a story. Near North had a crazy year, but things were just peachy over in Queens Ridge. And a business leader, you've just conveyed in 5 seconds, 10 seconds, what's going on in their locations with regard to cleanliness. And then they can say, hey, why is this? Why is this? What can we take or learn from these locations? And then, try and apply them at Near North or West Side or Buckley. Now, I just made this data up. This is all just dummy data and me typing in numbers more or less at random. But we're still trying to come up with a story here for the purposes of creating a spreadsheet and doing analysis for your client. So I'm going to go away from the camera for a second. I'm going to do all of this over again for customer service, and we'll come back and we'll see what a closer to finished product can look like. So I'll see you in a second. Okay, so we're back, and I've just done basically the exact same process we did with cleanliness, and I've gone and done it with customer service as well. So we've earmarked that Q1 is our baseline value, and then in Q2, 3, and 4, we illustrate the percent change from the previous, so month over month or quarter over quarter, etc. And we establish the average of that location over the course of the year. And so we can use this average as well to kind of illustrate, did they go up or down from where they were? Meaningfully, Queens Ridge started at 50 customer service. Queens Ridge seems like it's a really great location. It's very clean, it's very polite, and it's pretty stable too for the most part. Now, again, this is dummy data, so maybe I just got tired when I got down to the bottom of that row. Who knows? But if I'm a business leader, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, what are they doing at this location that we can take and improve upon or apply at our other locations? Similarly, I'm looking at Harbortown, the same thing. These are some of our locations that scored the best on our overall metrics. Another one is LaGrange. Let's take a look at them, see how they're doing. They have nice, steady, maybe their customer service isn't sterling, but they've managed to hold that value, and they've actually increased their average over the course of this fiscal year. So whatever they're doing, Is it a new manager? Is it a new hiring philosophy? Is it a new? I mean, it could be anything, right? And then this is all just dummy data, but you get the idea. And in terms of visual presentation, you can kind of already see how a lot more than this would already start to overwhelm the eye. It's already starting to get to be kind of a lot for folks to look at, and that's why. That this isn't actually all that useful. That's why I start to tell them the data they don't need to worry about too much with all these grays. All these gray values are figures you don't need to worry too much about. I really want to draw your attention to what's going on in here, and I pick fairly neutral, ignoring kind of colors that just sort of fall in the background and let the data come front and center. Now, again, obviously, you feel free to pick whatever colors work for you, but you get the idea. You really want the data to be the center of the attention, and you really want to underscore what pieces of information are important, because sure, they can look at the raw data, but what are they going to get from this? If you do something like this, you've painted the picture for them, and they can get the bottom line of your analysis in 5 minutes and be out the door, or at least beginning to ask meaningful, strategic, important questions. So in this episode, we improved the spreadsheet. We looked at the percent change formula. We looked at the structure. We've already looked at these before, obviously. The structure of building a formula in Excel, and the importance of closing your parentheses and ensuring that you're completing one action before moving on to the next. I tend to maybe over parenthesize my formulas, but I really want to be sure that things are happening in the order I want them to happen, and that's not what I wanted that to do. The next thing we took a look at was conditional formatting, which we'll take a look at in the future because there's a lot more here than just color scales. There's a lot of really interesting, useful tools in conditional formatting that can make your data presentable to a non-Excel user. And then the last thing we took a look at was hiding your data via the group function up here in the data tab. So I look forward to seeing you guys in the next episode, where we're going to take a look at presentation and how you put this in front of someone. How do you get this ready to take out of Excel, put it in front of someone? But until then, I'm Joe Pryor. I'll see you next time.